The sun hung high over the city of Lusala, casting golden light over its bustling streets. In the heart of the city stood Rigor Academy, a prestigious school where the children of the elite walked the halls in their polished shoes and designer uniforms. Among them was Zahara Adisa, the only daughter of Chief Adisa, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. Every morning, a sleek black car pulled up at the academy's gates, and Zahara stepped out with grace. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair neatly styled, and her aura commanded attention. Other students whispered about her, some admired her, others envied her, but none dared to question her status. Then there was Kwame Mensah, the complete opposite of Zahara. He arrived at school on foot, carrying books that had been borrowed from the library, his uniform slightly worn but always clean. His mother, a single woman who worked as a tailor, had raised him to believe that knowledge was the greatest wealth a person could have. And so, Kwame studied harder than anyone, determined to carve a path out of poverty. While Zahara lived in a world of gold and luxury, Kwame lived in a world of hard work and perseverance. First meeting, sparks fly. The first time Zahara and Kwame crossed paths, it was in the middle of the school's debate competition. The topic was, "Does wealth determine success?" and Zahara, speaking for the rich, stood confidently on the stage. Money is power, and power creates opportunities. Without wealth, dreams remain just that, dreams, she argued, her voice smooth and unwavering. The crowd nodded, some clapped. But then Kwame stood up, his eyes sharp with defiance. "Respectfully, I disagree," he said, stepping forward. His tone was calm but firm. "Wealth can buy comfort, but it cannot buy intelligence, skill, or determination. A man with nothing but knowledge can still rise above a man born into riches." The audience fell silent, murmuring amongst themselves. Zahara turned to face him, her dark eyes flashing. "Easy for you to say," she countered. "But do you really believe that someone without connections, without privilege, can stand in the same place as those born with influence?" Kwame smiled, not the kind of smile that showed amusement, but one that hinted at a challenge. "I don't just believe it," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "I'll prove it." The tension between them was electric, and from that day on, their rivalry was born. Enemies or something more? At first, their clashes were academic. Zahara was used to being the best, but now there was someone just as smart, if not smarter. In math, she would solve problems in record time, only for Kwame to do it even faster. In literature, she would analyze poetry beautifully, but Kwame's interpretations would leave the teachers in awe. During science experiments, they found themselves arguing over theories, each trying to prove the other wrong. Their classmates watched in fascination, Zahara, the rich heiress, and Kwame, the poor scholar, locked in an unspoken battle of intellect. But something strange started happening. Whenever Kwame beat Zahara in a test, instead of feeling angry, she felt curious. How could someone without private tutors and expensive books know so much? And Kwame, though he never admitted it, admired Zahara's confidence. She carried herself with a strength that made people listen when she spoke. One afternoon, after another heated debate, Zahara found herself sitting under the large baobab tree in the schoolyard, staring at her notes. Frustration burned inside her. No matter how hard she tried, Kwame always seemed one step ahead. Struggling, princess. She looked up to see Kwame standing there, arms crossed, a teasing smile on his lips. "What do you want, smarty?" she shot back. He chuckled and sat beside her. "You're good, Zahara. But you rely too much on what you've been taught. Sometimes, knowledge isn't just about memorization, it's about understanding." Zahara scoffed but found herself listening. For the first time, she saw Kwame not as a rival, but as someone worth learning from. And for Kwame, it was the first time he realized that Zahara was more than just a spoiled rich girl. A connection they didn't expect. Days turned into weeks, and their rivalry slowly turned into something else. They started helping each other with schoolwork in secret, when no one was watching. They found themselves laughing at the same jokes. They shared stories about their families. They realized that, despite their backgrounds, they weren't so different after all. But Zahara knew that if her father ever found out she was spending time with a boy like Kwame, he would never allow it. And Kwame? He feared that people would think he was only interested in Zahara because of her wealth. So they kept their growing friendship a secret, meeting only when they were certain no one else could see. But secrets have a way of coming out. And soon, the world would test their bond in ways they never imagined. The days that followed were different. Zahara and Kwame were no longer just rivals. There was an unspoken truce between them, a quiet understanding that neither of them wanted to acknowledge out loud. But friendship between them was dangerous. Zahara belonged to a world where wealth was power, and appearances meant everything. Her father, Chief Adisa, was a man of strict principles. He had worked too hard to build his empire, and he expected his daughter to associate only with people of her class. Kwame, on the other hand, came from nothing. His mother, Momaya, had struggled her entire life to give him an education. Every night, she reminded him, "You were born poor, but your mind is rich. Use it, Kwame. Make something of yourself." And so, he couldn't afford distractions. Especially not from someone like Zahara, whose world was built on the very privilege he had fought against his whole life. But somehow, they kept finding their way back to each other. The library meetings. It started with stolen moments in the school library. Zahara sat at the father's table, pretending to read while secretly watching Kwame as he scribbled in his notebook. One evening, unable to contain her curiosity, she walked up to him. "What are you always writing?" she asked, tilting her head. Kwame glanced up, his pen pausing. Thoughts. Thoughts. About what?" He hesitated before sliding the notebook toward her. Zahara scanned the words and frowned. "You write poetry?" she asked, surprised. Kwame smirked. "What, a poor boy can't appreciate literature?" Zahara rolled her eyes but kept reading. The words were beautiful, raw and real, speaking of struggles, dreams, and longing. "These are really good," she admitted. For the first time, Kwame saw something different in Zahara's eyes, not competition, not arrogance, but genuine admiration. And that was how it began. They started meeting in the library after school, helping each other with subjects they struggled in. Zahara taught Kwame advanced business strategies, something she had learned from her father. Kwame, in return, introduced her to African literature and history, showing her the world beyond money and power. They debated, they argued, they laughed, until it no longer felt like rivalry, but a friendship neither of them had expected. But they had to keep it hidden. The warning. One afternoon, Zahara was walking toward her father's car when she heard her name. It was Nana, her father's assistant. A man who had worked for the Adisa family for years. He was loyal to Chief Adisa and made sure everything in their world ran smoothly, including Zahara's life. "Miss Zahara," Nana said in a low voice. "Your father has been asking about you." "Why?" she asked, suddenly nervous. Nana's face remained neutral. "There are rumors that you have been spending time with a student named Kwame Mensah." Zahara's heart stopped. "Who told him?" she demanded. "It doesn't matter," Nana replied. "What matters is that Chief Adisa will not tolerate it. He believes this boy is not of your standard. He will not ask you twice to stay away." Zahara clenched her fist. "He's just my friend," she said through gritted teeth. Nana gave her a look that sent a chill down her spine. Your father does not believe in friendships between people like you and people like him. If he hears more, there will be consequences. Zahara didn't say another word. She got into the car, her hands shaking. She knew what her father was capable of. And she knew she had to be careful. But she also knew she wasn't ready to let go of Kwame. The confrontation. That evening, she met Kwame under the baobab tree at the edge of the schoolyard. Their usual place when no one was watching. "We need to be careful," she said, looking over her shoulder. Kwame frowned. "What's wrong?" She hesitated before saying, "My father knows about us." Kwame stiffened. "Us? I mean, our friendship," she corrected quickly, but even she knew how unconvincing it sounded. Kwame sighed and ran a hand over his face. "Zahara, maybe this isn't a good idea. Your father is powerful. If he doesn't want us talking, then..." "So what?" she interrupted. "I'm not a child, Kwame. I don't need permission to be friends with someone." But Kwame shook his head. "You don't understand. People like your father, they can destroy people like me." Zahara felt anger rise in her chest. "And what about me? You think I can just walk away like nothing happened?" she said, her voice trembling. Kwame looked at her then, really looked at her. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. She cared. Maybe more than she should. Maybe more than was safe. And so did he. But instead of saying it, Kwame took a step back. "Maybe it's for the best if we stop this now," he said quietly. "Before it gets too complicated." Zahara's heart clenched. She wanted to argue. To tell him he was being a coward. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, she knew Kwame was trying to protect them both. The secret promise. The next few days were different. They didn't sit together in class. They didn't exchange glances in the hallways. They acted as if they were strangers. But Zahara felt hollow. She missed his sarcastic comments, his knowing smirk, the way he challenged her to think differently. And Kwame. He couldn't focus. He had spent years believing emotions were a distraction, that love and friendship were luxuries he couldn't afford. But now, he wasn't so sure. One evening, as Zahara was leaving school, she saw Kwame standing outside the gates, waiting for her. He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Meet me under the baobab tree tomorrow. Just once." Her heart pounded, but she nodded. And when they met the next day, neither of them spoke for a long time. Then, finally, Zahara whispered, "I don't want to lose this." Kwame looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then we keep it secret," he said. "For how long?" she asked. "For as long as we can." And in that moment, they made an unspoken promise. They didn't know what they were to each other, friends, rivals, something more. All they knew was that they weren't ready to let go. But the world wouldn't let them hide forever. And soon, their secret would come at a cost. For weeks, Zahara and Kwame lived in their own little world, hidden from prying eyes. They met under the baobab tree when no one was around. They passed notes in class, filled with inside jokes and encouragement. To the rest of the school, they were still rivals, still complete opposites. But in secret, they were something neither of them could name yet. Zahara had never felt so free before. With Kwame, she didn't have to be the perfect daughter of Chief Adisa. She didn't have to pretend. And Kwame. He had spent his whole life believing that the rich and the poor could never truly mix, but Zahara made him question everything. Still, they both knew the risk. And soon, the world would remind them just how dangerous their connection was. A dangerous discovery. It happened one evening when Zahara's father called her into his study. Chief Adisa sat behind his massive wooden desk, his face unreadable. His assistant, Nana, stood nearby. Zahara felt her heart pound. "You wanted to see me, Baba?" she asked cautiously. Chief Adisa leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Yes," he said, his voice cold. "I've been hearing some troubling rumors." Zahara's stomach twisted. "What kind of rumors?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Her father's sharp gaze met hers. "That my daughter has been spending time with a certain boy. A boy named Kwame Mensah." The air in the room felt heavy. "He's just my classmate," Zahara said quickly. "Nothing more." But her father wasn't convinced. "A classmate," he repeated. "Then explain this." He tossed a small folded paper onto the desk. Zahara's heart stopped when she recognized it. It was one of the notes she had passed to Kwame, filled with jokes and messages only they would understand. Someone had found it. Someone had betrayed them. Her hands clenched into fists. "I will ask you once, Zahara," her father said, his voice dangerously calm. "Are you involved with this boy?" Zahara hesitated. She could lie. She could deny everything. But something inside her refused to. "Yes," she admitted softly. "We are friends." Chief Adisa's expression darkened. "No, you are not," he said, his voice like ice. "You are my daughter. And you do not mix with people like him." Zahara's anger flared. "People like him," she repeated, her voice rising. "Kwame is one of the smartest students in school. He works harder than anyone I know." "Enough," her father roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The room fell silent. After a moment, Chief Adisa spoke again, his voice lower but no less dangerous. "You will stay away from that boy, Zahara," he said. "I am warning you." Zahara's jaw tightened. "And if I don't?" she dared to ask. Her father's face hardened. "Then I will make sure he regrets ever meeting you." A chill ran down her spine. Zahara knew her father. He wasn't just making empty threats. He had the power to ruin lives, and she had no doubt he would use it. The heartbreaking decision. That night, Zahara barely slept. Her father's words haunted her. "I will make sure he regrets ever meeting you." She couldn't let that happen. The next day, she found Kwame in their usual spot under the baobab tree. "We have to stop this," she said, her voice trembling. Kwame frowned. "What are you talking about?" Zahara's eyes filled with tears. "My father knows. He's watching us. If we don't stop now, he will destroy you, Kwame." Kwame stared at her, his expression unreadable. "So that's it," he said quietly. "You're giving up." Zahara's chest ached. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. For the first time, she saw something in Kwame's eyes that she had never seen before. Hurt. He took a step back. "I thought you were different, Zahara." His voice was cold. "But I guess, in the end, you're just like the rest of them." His words cut deeper than she expected. "That's not fair," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to protect you." Kwame shook his head. "I never needed your protection, Zahara. I needed your belief in me." And with that, he walked away. Zahara felt like she couldn't breathe. She had done what she thought was right. So why did it feel like her heart was breaking? The silent pain. Days passed, and everything changed. Kwame stopped talking to Zahara. He didn't even look at her in class. Zahara felt lost. She went back to her world of privilege, but it felt empty without him. Everyone noticed. Their rivalry had turned into something else, and now, whatever it was had disappeared. One evening, Zahara sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection. "Is this really what I want?" she whispered to herself. Her father had one. She had obeyed. But at what cost? The unexpected letter. Just when she thought it was over, something changed. One morning, a small, folded paper slipped onto her desk. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Kwame's. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The message was short. Meet me under the baobab tree. One last time. Zahara's heart pounded. She knew she shouldn't. She knew the risks. But some things were worth risking everything for. And she wasn't ready to say goodbye just yet. Zahara's heart pounded as she approached the baobab tree that evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the schoolyard. The tree, which had once been their safe place, now felt like a final meeting ground, one last moment before everything fell apart. She spotted Kwame sitting on the exposed roots, staring into the distance. His usual confident expression was missing, replaced with something heavier, something Zahara had never seen before. She hesitated before sitting down beside him. "You came," he said quietly. "Of course, I did," Zahara whispered. There was silence between them. A silence filled with everything left unsaid. The goodbye that wasn't really goodbye. "I hate this," Zahara admitted, her voice trembling. "I hate that my father controls my life. I hate that he thinks he can decide who I should and shouldn't care about." Kwame let out a small, bitter chuckle. "Welcome to my world," he said. "Except, for people like me, we've never had the luxury of choice." Zahara turned to him. "Kwame, you know that's not how I see you, right?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter how you see me, Zahara. Your father has already decided my worth." She reached for his hand. "Then let's leave it all behind," she blurted out. "Run away. Just for a while. Just you and me. Away from expectations, away from all of this." Kwame pulled his hand away. "And then what?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What happens when reality catches up to us? When your father comes looking for you? When you realize you can't live my life?" Tears burned Zahara's eyes. "I don't care about any of that," she cried. "I just don't want to lose you." Kwame's jaw clenched. "You already have." The words felt like a slap. Zahara stared at him, her heart cracking. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just going to give up?" Kwame stood up. "No, Zahara," he said. "I'm just accepting the truth." She watched him walk away. And this time, he didn't look back. The betrayal. Zahara didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying Kwame's words over and over, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so fast. But she wouldn't have time to dwell on it. Because the next morning, everything got worse. When she arrived at school, whispers filled the hallways. "Did you hear what happened?" "I can't believe it," someone reported him. "He's being expelled." Zahara's stomach dropped. She pushed through the crowd and found Kwame standing in front of the principal's office, his mother, Momaya, standing beside him, her face filled with anger and heartbreak. She barely had time to react before the principal's voice rang out. "Kwame Mensah, you have violated school policy by engaging in dishonest activities. You are hereby expelled, effective immediately." The room spun. "What?" Zahara gasped. Kwame clenched his fist. "That's a lie," he said, his voice controlled but furious. "I did nothing wrong." The principal shook his head. "We received an anonymous report that you've been," he paused, before lowering his voice, "cheating on exams. That your recent grades are the result of stolen test papers." Gasps filled the room. Kwame's face darkened. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Everyone knows I worked for those grades." Momaya stepped forward. My son is innocent, she said, her voice trembling. This is a setup. But it didn't matter. The decision had already been made. Kwame was being thrown out. And Zahara knew exactly who was behind it. Confronting the enemy. Zahara stormed into her father's office that evening, her hands shaking with rage. Chief Adisa sat calmly at his desk, flipping through papers as if nothing had happened. You did this, Zahara hissed. Her father didn't even look up. Did what? He asked smoothly. Don't pretend, she snapped. You framed Kwame. You had him expelled. He finally met her eyes, his expression unreadable. I told you to stay away from him, he said simply. You didn't listen. So I handled the situation. Zahara's blood boiled. You ruined his future, she ceded. No, Zahara, her father said, his voice cold. I saved yours. Her hands clenched into fists. You think you can control my life, she spat. You think you can just decide who I care about? Her father sighed and stood up. Zahara, one day, you will understand that the world is not fair. You are a woman of status. You do not belong with someone like him. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be. She stared at him, realizing something painful. You don't care about my happiness, she whispered. You only care about your reputation. Her father didn't deny it. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. I hate you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Chief Adisa didn't react. You'll thank me one day, he said. Zahara turned on her heels and stormed out. The aftermath. Kwame was gone. His scholarship, his chance at a better life, all of it stolen. Zahara tried to reach out to him, but he refused to see her. She waited outside his house, desperate to explain, desperate to do something. But when Kwame finally stepped out, his eyes were cold. This is the last time you'll see me, Zahara, he said. Kwame, please. No, he interrupted. Your word will always win. I was stupid to think I could ever belong in it. Her heart shattered. I never wanted this, she whispered. But you couldn't stop it either, could you? He said bitterly. She had no answer. Kwame took a deep breath, as if letting go of something he had held onto for too long. Goodbye, Zahara. And just like that, he was gone. A love torn apart. For the first time in her life, Zahara felt truly alone. She had lost the one person who had ever truly understood her. And worst of all, she had no idea if she would ever see him again. But fate wasn't finished with them yet. Because this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Kwame walked away from Zahara, from Rigor Academy, from the life he had fought so hard to build. The pain was unbearable, but he refused to let it break him. His mother, Mama Ya, wept the night he was expelled. She held him close, whispering words of strength into his ears. They took your school, but they can't take your mind, my son. They can't take what's inside you. Kwame held onto those words like a lifeline. He wouldn't let Chief Adisa win. He wouldn't let the world decide his future. So, he made a promise to himself, he would rise, no matter what it took. From the ground up. With no school and no scholarship, Kwame had only two choices. Give up. Fight harder. He chose the second. By day, he worked as a bricklayer, sweating under the scorching sun, his hands blistered and sore. By night, he studied, borrowing books from the local library, refusing to let his mind rot away. He taught children from his neighborhood for a small fee, using what little he earned to buy old textbooks. People laughed. The smartest boy in school is now a laborer. What can intelligence do when you have no power? But Kwame ignored them. He refused to be a victim. He refused to be forgotten. An unexpected opportunity. One evening, while working at a construction site, he overheard two men talking. The National University is offering full scholarships to the top scorers in the entrance exams this year, one of them said. Kwame's heart leaped. A second chance. A way out. That night, he ran home and told Momaya. I'm going to take that exam, Mo. And I'm going to win that scholarship. His mother wiped her tears and cupped his face. Then go, my son. Show them who you are. The hardest challenge yet. The months leading up to the university entrance exam were brutal. Kwame worked in the morning and studied late into the night by candlelight. He practiced math problems on scraps of paper, solving equations until his hands ached. He memorized science theories while carrying cement bags, whispering formulas under his breath. He had no tutors, no expensive study materials, just determination. And finally, the day came. As he entered the examination hall, he felt the weight of everything that had led him here. You only get one shot, he told himself. So he focused, he wrote, he poured everything he had into those pages. And when he walked out of that hall, he knew. He had given it his all. Meanwhile, in Zahara's world. While Kwame was fighting for his future, Zahara was trapped in hers. Her father controlled everything, where she went, who she spoke to, what she studied. She was forced into business classes, being trained to take over her father's empire. She attended lavish parties, surrounded by people who only cared about status and wealth. But none of it mattered. Her mind was always elsewhere. With Kwame. Where was he? Was he okay? Did he hate her? She had tried to reach out, but he wouldn't see her, wouldn't talk to her. And slowly, a realization hit her. This is not my life. This is my father's life. And for the first time, she wondered, what if she didn't want it? The results. Weeks later, the exam results were posted. Kwame walked to the notice board, his hands trembling. A crowd had gathered, students and parents scanning the names. And then, his name. Right at the top. Kwame Mensah, rank number 1. A full scholarship. A place at the National University. He had done it. He had won. Momaya wept with joy, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. You did it, my son, she sobbed. You proved them all wrong. Kwame's chest swelled with pride. But there was one person missing. Zahara. Did she know? Did she care? It didn't matter. His journey was just beginning. A new chapter. On his first day at university, Kwame walked onto campus with his head held high. He wasn't a poor boy anymore. He was a scholar, a future leader, a man who had defied the odds. And then, as he stood in the crowd of new students, a voice behind him made his heart stop. Smarty. He turned. And there she was. Zahara. Standing in front of him, looking just as stunned as he felt. He had no words. Neither did she. Because fate had brought them back together. And neither of them knew what would happen next. Kwame stood frozen. Of all the people he expected to see at the National University, Zahara was the last. She looked different. Not in appearance, but in her eyes. The fire he remembered was still there, but now there was something else, a quiet determination. What are you doing here? Kwame finally managed to ask. Zahara crossed her arms, tilting her head. What does it look like? She said with a small smirk. I'm a student here. Kwame's chest tightened. But how? Your father. I fought for it, she interrupted. I failed my business entrance exam on purpose 3 times. I told my father I wanted to study something that mattered to me. He finally gave in. Kwame stared at her, stunned. She had risked everything to take control of her own life. "You're unbelievable," he muttered. "I know," she said, grinning. "Now, are you going to congratulate me, or just stand there looking shocked?" For the first time in a long time, Kwame laughed. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. The silent war. But Zahara's father wasn't done fighting. He restricted her access to money, hoping she would give up and return home. He sent people to watch her, making sure she wasn't associating with Kwame. He pressured university officials, trying to make life difficult for her. But Zahara didn't break. Instead, she found a way to survive on her own. She took part-time jobs at the university library. She lived in a small dorm, refusing to go back to her father's mansion. She surrounded herself with people who didn't care about wealth, but about who she really was. Kwame watched all of it happen. And something in him changed. Zahara wasn't just a rich girl anymore. She was a fighter. The tension between them. Even though fate had brought them back together, things weren't easy. Kwame still had doubts. He had worked so hard to build himself up. Could he really risk getting close to her again? Zahara was patient. She didn't push him. She simply stayed by his side, waiting for him to trust her again. One evening, they found themselves alone in the university gardens, sitting on a bench beneath the stars. "Are we ever going to talk about it?" Zahara asked. Kwame sighed. "Talk about what?" he said, pretending not to know. Zahara rolled her eyes. "Us, Kwame. What we were. What we could be." Kwame looked away. "I don't know if we should go down that road again, Zahara," he admitted. She turned to him, searching his face. "Why not?" she asked softly. He exhaled. "Because people like your father will never let us be together," he said. "Because you deserve an easy life, not one full of struggle." Zahara's eyes burned with frustration. "Kwame," she said, grabbing his hand, "don't you get it? I don't want an easy life. I want a life that I choose. And I choose you." Kwame's heart raced. She meant it. Every single word. But could he let himself believe in it? The final test. Their relationship remained in limbo, somewhere between friendship and something more. Until one day, Chief Adisa struck his final blow. A university official approached Kwame in the library, handing him a sealed envelope. Inside was an offer letter, a fully funded opportunity to study abroad, all expenses paid. Kwame's heart pounded as he read the details. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. But then he saw the fine print. At the bottom of the letter, in small, neat handwriting, were the words: "In accepting this scholarship, the recipient agrees to cut all ties with Zahara Adisa." Kwame's breath caught in his throat. This was her father's final move. A choice. Live and secure his future. Stay and fight for Zahara. The decision that changed everything. That night, Kwame met Zahara under the baobab tree near campus. She looked at him, sensing something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. Kwame took a deep breath and handed her the letter. She scanned it, her eyes widening. Then, slowly, she looked up at him. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Kwame clenched his fist. "I don't know," he admitted. Tears welled in Zahara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Kwame, listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "I love you. But I will not be the reason you give up your dreams." Kwame's heart clenched. "But if I go, I lose you," he said. Zahara smiled sadly. "If you go, and if we're meant to be, we'll find our way back to each other," she whispered. Kwame closed his eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Then, finally, he made his choice. Kwame stood under the baobab tree, the scholarship letter clutched in his hands. Zahara's words echoed in his mind. If you go, and if we're meant to be, we'll find our way back to each other. He looked at her, the girl who had risked everything, who had fought for her own freedom, who had chosen him when the world told her not to. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just about love. It was about his future. Her future. Their future. He took a deep breath. Then he tore the letter in half. Walking away from the chains. Zahara gasped. Kwame, what are you doing? She whispered, staring at the shredded paper in his hands. He met her eyes, his voice steady. I'm choosing my own path, Zahara. Not one controlled by your father. Not one that forces me to abandon the person who has always believed in me. Tears filled Zahara's eyes. Are you sure? She asked, her voice shaking. Kwame smiled, a real, genuine smile. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. For the first time in years, he felt free. Not bound by wealth. Not bound by status. Not bound by the expectations of others. And Zahara. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight, as if she had been waiting for this moment forever. I love you, Kwame, she whispered. I love you too, Zahara, he murmured back. The final showdown. But their battle wasn't over. Chief Adisa wasn't going to let his daughter walk away so easily. When he found out that Kwame had rejected the scholarship, he was furious. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, he roared at Zahara when she confronted him at home. But this time, Zahara didn't back down. No, Baba, she said firmly. The biggest mistake would be letting you control my happiness. Chief Adisa's face turned red. You are my daughter. You belong in high society. You belong with someone who can provide for you. Zahara took a deep breath. Kwame is the smartest, hardest working man I have ever met, she said. And I would rather build a life with him, brick by brick, than live in a golden cage of your making. Her father stared at her, his hands trembling with anger. If you walk out that door, Zahara, you will no longer be my daughter. The words hit like a knife, but Zahara didn't flinch. She turned to him one last time. Then I guess I was never yours to control in the first place. And with that, she walked away. Building a new life. Zahara and Kwame had nothing except each other. No money. No security. No certainty. But they had hope. And that was enough. Zahara worked as a freelance writer, using her skills to support herself. Kwame took on teaching jobs, helping students while continuing his studies. They rented a tiny apartment, barely big enough for two, but filled with love. And slowly, brick by brick, they built their life together. Years later. The ultimate victory. 5 years passed. Kwame stood on the stage of the biggest conference hall in the country, dressed in a sharp suit, a confident smile on his face. The audience roared with applause as he received an award, Innovator of the Year, for his groundbreaking work in education reform. Beside him, Zahara stood proudly, holding his hand. She was now a published author and journalist, known for exposing corruption and fighting for social justice. They had proved everyone wrong. And the best part. Chief Adisa was in the audience. For the first time in years, Zahara's father approached them after the event. His face was unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. I was wrong about you, Kwame, he admitted, his voice gruff. Kwame raised an eyebrow. I know, he said with a smirk. Chief Adisa sighed before turning to his daughter. And you, Zahara, you are stronger than I ever realized. For the first time, her father didn't try to control her. Did it mean he fully accepted them? Maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore. Because they had already won. happily ever after. No. Something even better. As Kwame and Zahara walked home that night, she squeezed his hand. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" she asked, smiling. Kwame chuckled. "No," he admitted. "But I always knew we'd make it somehow." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together." And he knew, deep in his heart, that she was right. Because this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning.